Got a bit of David Katz and his magic on News Nation, I think. Is that where this is from, Albert? Play a little bit of David Katz on News Nation. This is just in the last day or so.
David, Vice President J.D. Vance, we remember how all of that unfolded in the Oval Office. Some folks in your party called it an ambush by J.D. Vance that led to the explosion and Zelensky virtually being thrown out of the White House. But now J.D. Vance is saying that the United States might have to take a step back if a deal is not reached between Ukraine and Russia. Let's listen to that. I'll let you respond.
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians.
David, is there a point where the U.S. should walk away?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad to hear Rena, a Republican, say those things, because I'm a Democrat who worked for President Reagan for 6 years. I remember the Cold War really well. I remember Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. And Trump ought to be saying to Putin, stop bombing and killing and raping and pillaging Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, David Katz, well, let me just introduce him now. This is the former federal prosecutor, now defense attorney. John joins us on Thursdays, David Katz, but across the English-speaking world, he offers those kinds of takes on politics and all that. You've been very busy, of course, because the news has come out fast and furious. I watched that entire interview. That seemed to be a pretty civil exchange, and so, again, I know you do these things on Fox News Channel, also on News Nation, et cetera. And there can be degrees of civility that differ, right?
Well, there was a fellow named Alan Combs about 15 or 20 years ago. And when Sean Hannity made his TV show, they wanted to have that balance. Now, it seemed like Sean Hannity always had the best lines. He always got to sort of win the chess game with Combs. But, Combs tried as hard as he could. And that's what I try to do on these stations. But obviously do it, Mark. And I just heard you talking about whether you were maybe too civil. And I really don't think you can be too civil in one of those exchanges. I think having a polite conversation, no matter how passionately you care about things. I don't know if anybody's seen, I used to be on CNN a lot in 2018 and 19, and then they went to a different format and they moved to Atlanta, and it made hard to do the show from LA, but we did it at night. And we had somebody from the left, somebody from the right, and I was the umpire. So that was the best work I ever had. The host would turn to me, Mark, and say, you're a former assistant U.S. attorney. Tell us, Mr. Katz, what is the law on that? And normally the law was all against Trump first round. And I got to say that. And my friend said, how come you don't say anything good about what Trump is doing legally? I said, well, let Trump do something legal. I'll say it's legal. But if he keeps doing illegal things, and of course, now this term, we've had just an orgy of illegality and unconstitutional acts by Trump. But my point was that I think it's always good. Now, if you watch CNN at night, they have 5 different guests on and a presenter, and all they do is scream at each other. In my opinion, the show now on CNN is completely unwatchable. One is too many guests, but one is that they all just scream at each other, and it becomes a food fight. And there are some people who like that. That was what the Jerry Springer show. But that's not what I think is the way that we ought to have legal and political discourse. And I know I just sound like another guest who's buttering up the presenter. But Mark, I think that you and Kim, you do it really well. And you have some people on who aren't in agreement with you. And I think that is the proper way. And, I always say you guys can ask me any questions. And I try to say, not what's right or what's left, but what's right and not wrong. And it is a gripe that obviously presenters and stations who are very smart, Mark, and clever, they know what information sort of drives their viewers, their typical viewers, in a certain direction. And it always bothers me when they hold back certain facts that I think are really relevant. And I try to bring the facts out. When we talked about Abrego Garcia the other day, it might have been with Kim or it might have been with you. I brought up the fact that he had this domestic violence conviction, that his wife had gotten a restraining order against him, because I thought it was important. I didn't think it mattered at all to whether he'd gotten due process of law. I didn't think it mattered at all to whether he should be brought back, having been wrongly sent to this El Salvador hellhole prison. But I did think it was relevant. And now you watch Trump in this crazy interview that he gave to ABC where he demeaned the guy. I agreed to do the interview with you guys, ABC. I didn't know who the hell you were, but I figured that was probably better if I didn't know who the hell you were. And to tell a famous journalist he doesn't know who the hell he is, that's all designed. That's all part of Trump's show. But my point is, what's the first thing he said about Abrego Garcia? If he were a gentleman, I would have brought him back, but he has this domestic violence conviction. Everybody seems to forget about the fact that he beat his wife and she went and got a protective order. It was going to be the top of the rhetoric about the case. And I didn't want to leave it out of what I told your audience. And I think it gripes me all the time. I watch MSNBC and I think, no, there's two facts that you know are out there and you don't mention them. And of course, Fox is completely, almost completely fake news. If you look at like Laura Ingraham, who I've been on with, and you look at Hannity and you look at whoever the hell they have on that show there. And last one thing about Fox, they're supposed to be funny at night. They have that show and they're not funny the way that you could be, the way that Colbert is. They're just snarky and mean-spirited. That's really not the essence of comedy in my book.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't catch a lot of that show, the Greg Gutfeld show or whatever. Yeah, but I know that they peacock about the ratings and you know, again, the media landscape is changing. It's interesting.
His only saving grace, Mark Gutfeld, is that he went to Berkeley.
Is that right? Wow.
You had to know the frat boys. No. One of those frat boys was going to turn into Gutfeld. And
that's wild. That's absolutely wild. Well, David, I want to ask you first about, let's get into the legal stuff, and then I'll double back and everybody, I will comment on a couple of things with the ambassador conversation, but thank you for your words on that. Today, David, the court, a federal judge actually put a stop to the deportation of these identified illegal immigrants, those who are here in this country illegally. He's put a stop, this judge has, to using the Alien and Enemies Act to essentially fly the flag that allows these deportations. Even, by the way, just as an aside, and then I'll please I need you to weigh in on this, but even if you use that act, those people are still entitled to some kind of due process, are they not? I mean, in other words, this is only part of it, the Alien Enemies Act.
Well, they would be entitled to the process that would be due in time of war. And certainly it could be argued that in a true time of war, that act from the 18th century would change how much process was due. Now, this fellow, Abrego Garcia, didn't get any process. He got sent there wrongly over an order from an immigration judge that he not be sent back there. And the reason for the order, I'm not making this up, is that he was an El Salvadorian who was being threatened by the El Salvadorian gang. And so he would be, and had a right to asylum not to go to El Salvador. The immigration judge held in his favor unless there was some further hearing where he was allowed to be sent there. So Trump and his administration did the exact opposite thing, not only from what the judge had ordered, but from common sense. They sent him to the place where he was most likely to actually be murdered by that gang that was threatening him. It wasn't that he was a member of the gang. If they could ever prove that he had anything to do with a gang, it seemed like he was an apostate. He was someone who'd actually left the gang, and now the gang was after him. So that was all completely crazy. But just to turn to that Alien Act from, I think it's 1799, it's absolutely clear that it's only to be used in time of war. It's only been used 3 times, which were in time of war. We are not in time of war. For any advisor to tell him that that was legal, or for any judge to rule that that was legal to use it in this situation when we're not in war against Abrego Garcia and the other people who were sent on those 3 flights, is legal malpractice. There is no basis. There's loads of things that are arguable in the law. That's not one of them. It only applies in wartime. And that's what that judge just said today. It only applies in wartime, so it can't be used. That's yet another reason why those 3 flights were illegal. Not only did a judge tell them to turn around and they were in contempt of the judge's order, not only did they send people down there who were ordered by judges not to be sent down there, but the whole basis of the act is bogus.
And so you end up with what we thought we'd end up with, which is a judge's order saying that this is not legitimate, and this policy that may indeed be repeated of scooping up people who you consider to be bad dudes they're all dudes so far, although the researchers, and we've seen them scoop up that, I mean, she was an incredible scientific researcher, like one you'd be, desperate to get to your country. And she was scooped up and sent to Louisiana. Was in that prison for at least a month, maybe over a month. I think she's now just been returned, not to freedom, but to another holding place up in New England, which is kind of where she started. But anyway.
This is Miss Ozturk, the Turk who was grabbed on the street by masked men. It looked like something that would happen in a fascist country and not in America. That lady, Ozturk.
Right. There were two of them. There was her, and then there was the researcher, the scientific researcher who was stopped at immigration and at customs when she was coming back into this country from Paris. She was bringing frog embryos that had been requested by the Harvard researcher, head of the department, who was working with her. She's a renowned scientific researcher, and she was arrested, sent to this place in Louisiana, and she's I think still fighting for her freedom. So you get these cases. But I guess what I was getting back to was, we thought we'd be here, David, where there'd be a court order saying no more of this. Now we have to see whether this administration respects that.
Well, they won't send any more flights. I mean, someone is really going to go to jail, administration or not, and they'll have to be pardoned by Trump afterwards. And it will be, you'll have to be a little bit when I said there is some level of spectacle that Trump will not want. At some point, he's going to cave on some of these things because, certainly with his base and even with a lot of moderates, the core of what he's doing on immigration is fairly popular. So he's losing the popularity, rightly or wrongly, in the opinion of many in your audience. But he's losing the popularity of, the border crossings are way, way down. I mean, Mark, you have to say the Democrats seems like they could have done this, even without that legislation that they complained about at the end that Trump pulled back, that the Republicans were willing to do on a joint basis. That statute never did pass. And nothing has really changed from what the law was before. And it's just got to be admitted that Trump has managed to stop these border crossings to an amazing extent. And some of the deportations, if you would follow due process, are probably popular. Going to an after-hours club in Colorado that's open at 3:30 in the morning and catching the people that you catch at a club at 3:30, it's not like the stupid things that he does, like allow people to go to churches and allow them to go to schools where parents are picking up their kids. If he would stick to stuff like that, the truth is, I think a lot of it would be popular with a whole lot of the population, like it or not. But he does these things that are so impulsive and stupid and illegal. And of course, that allows his opponents, one of whom I am, to point to the fact that he's not following the law, which he's not following the law. So I don't think he's going to send any more flights back, any flights out. And then I think some of these particular people that we're talking about, I've always thought Abrego Garcia is going to come back here. He may come back here to a hearing that gives him due process and that then deports him. But that's, of course, exactly how our system works. I mean, most people who get prosecuted, Mark, are guilty. They get their Miranda warning, they get their due process rights. And at the end of the day, a great majority of them are guilty. We accept that in America, but we don't accept that because most of the people that the government wants to get are guilty, that we dispense with due process. That's what makes us different from other countries. And I just want to add one thing, Mark, to what you said about the immigrants. To the extent America is exceptional, we have these two oceans between us, two friendly neighbors, at least until Trump started in with Canada, two friendly neighbors, two huge oceans protecting us, and this amazing abundance of, our soil, our minerals, all that kind of thing. But you think what makes us exceptional beyond that? And part of it is the brain drain. Part of it is that all these brilliant people all over the world want to come here. Trump is dissipating that. It's just crazy. These researchers don't have to come here from India and China and everywhere in the world. They can go to France. France would be happy to have them. Canada would be happy to have them. But guess what? They come here. We have this huge advantage that students all over the world want to come here to study. Scientists want to come here to be scientists. These tech bros came here, right, to work on their huge industries that made us so rich, that made the Silicon Valley the wonder of the world, that made California the fourth largest economy in the entire world, all by itself. And you start to lose that. You lose the rule of law. You lose all these other things. These are the things that really do make us exceptional. And, all great empires, read your history, have frittered away their huge advantages. And I sure hope America doesn't do that, but we are definitely doing it under Trump. We're losing the things that really make us great.
Yeah, I see a lot about the empire, the death of an empire, and I get that that's clickbaity. And I've read Chris Hedges' book about I forget what it's called, America Empire and on the decline. Or I've read a couple of these books, and the points made, I think, underpinning that general proposition are really powerful. But what you suggested, I think, is fast tracking the end of the American empire. Again, I hate the word empire, but it might be very appropriate in the case of America because we have these sorts of empirical instincts, military adventurism. We have military bases all over the world. We have a dominant economy that we've used both with soft power and with hard power, with in hot exchanges. We just he's continuing to do the bombing in Yemen and all of these other places, even as he's talked about by many of his supporters as the president for peace. He's a smack talker, and he seems anxious to use his military. So against all of that, I see the decline. But what you've said is something quite significant, which is that he's fast-tracked, and we talked a bit about this with the ambassador. I mean, decades of goodwill that followed World War II and a kind of freedom and democracy and a democratic republic that was celebrated around the world, where at least it was an attempt at a purer system that represented the people's voice. That has all really been destroyed in 100 days.
Well, and if we don't have that standing in the world, who's going to replace us? Because it's not like, there have been excesses in America, and if we curb our excesses, that would be great. Okay, that's not what Trump wants to do. But where would the other consolidations of power come? They're obviously in the Far East. China wants to be worse than all of the things that are said about America. They want to not be for freedom. They want to exploit their neighbors. They want to make sure that they have a steady supply of raw materials. They don't respect liberty, freedom. These people who compare us to China, they're so far out of what's really going on. The Russian Empire, you see what the Russians want to do. And that's what I was saying on that show. You didn't play the part where I said about, we have to stand by, walk away from the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Are you kidding? We have to stand by Ukraine. Ukraine is a European power that's getting destroyed. This is the worst thing in Europe since Hitler. And we have to stand by the victims of this new Hitler from the point of view, not of extermination camps, but from the point of view of invading his neighbors and just thinking he can rape and pillage and destroy churches and destroy businesses and get away with it. That would be the worst lesson, Mark, for the world if he could get away with it, because there's China just, salivating over Taiwan right across the straits and all these other countries. It would be a message to them. Yes, take what you want by force and you'll win in the end, because that's what Trump wants to do. He wants to give victory to Russia in the end for their bad behavior and carve up Ukraine. And that's what I think Democrats need to stand up, and we are against him doing that. And I think we can win an awful lot of Republicans, the Reagan Democrats, the Reagan people from the Cold War. I think they're all on our side on that. I don't know what Trump wants to do, get his Moscow Trump hotel, some kind of mineral deal that he thinks is going to enrich his family and some of his cronies. But none of it is worth allowing Russia to get away with any of this. And I know it's going to be very hard, Mark, to get Crimea back. And in fairness, Crimea was taken under Obama, and I guess Georgia was decimated under W. It's gone on for a while that we haven't stood up to Russia. And I'm not like McCain. I know you have to not stand there in Kiev like McCain did and act like Ukraine is going to join NATO the next day. Of course, that was provocative, but Russia started this war and they can't get away with carving up Ukraine.
Well, because you're talking about Ukraine and Russia, let me just follow this for a second, because I think that what's happened is significant. And that is, there is a deal, and it's the only deal that Ukrainians cleverly, I think, realized, and those in control, is it Zelensky or I think they realized you've got to give Trump and the Americans something, because they don't care about the stuff that David Katz just talked about clearly anymore. They don't care about the rise of authoritarianism. They don't care about Putin's aggression. They don't care about any of this anymore. They have a whole reconstituted vision of what's happening here. And unless you give the Americans now some kind of interest here in Ukraine, we are going to lose Ukraine to the Russians because the Americans are going to serve Ukraine up to them. And so this rare earth minerals deal, that gives Trump particularly some skin in the game. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I think that was very smart of Ukraine. I think the Europeans are escalating their production of weapons. You know, one thing that's going to happen is that, you say Trump says we're bailing them out, they're taking advantage of us. The weapons were almost all bought from American manufacturers. It was propping up the so-called military industrial complex. That's what's so interesting, is that Democrats who used to stand up against, why are we spending so much money on the military, now say spend more money on the military if it's going to help Ukraine survive and fend off Russia. So yeah, I think that was very smart of them to do that. And they need to survive right now. They need to not have like half their country basically handed over. And Crimea may have to go, but it's one thing to say, I mean, this is diplomacy. This is like anybody who knows their world history. You don't say, oh, you can have Crimea. Here's the deal. Russia has Crimea. No, you say, look, you're occupying the place. This is totally illegal. This will not stand. We will never allow this to happen. Mexico has never admitted that we won the Mexican-American War and that we're entitled to California, Arizona, and Texas. They go to the United Nations every year, which will now have Waltz over there. What a demotion. And they'll make their motion with Waltz sitting there, probably on his chat thing that he shouldn't be on over at the United Nations, and say, we demand the return of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas because it was wrongly taken from us. And the world should always say that Crimea was wrongly taken, and at every opportunity, try to get Crimea back to Ukraine and try to stop Russia from this land grab over there. Not say, oh, Crimea stays with Russia. I mean, the things that Trump says, it's so unbelievable. And anyone who compares him to Reagan, like I said, I was around during Reagan. His stuff was very well written, very well researched, and he didn't say stupid things like that. And what's he known for? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. So if you're out there voting for Trump and you think what Trump is doing is okay, Mr. Putin, withdraw your troops.
Yeah, I think you're so right about this. He's kind of given away the store. A guy who considers himself this master negotiator. He's clearly not.
Well, we know what a farce that is.
Yeah, it was that
the
exactly.
Idiocy of the deal. The idiocy of every deal. This man bankrupted everything he touched, and I think your other guest said he's bankrupting America. He's spending like a drunken sailor. How do the Republicans buy into this?
Well, I think the information isn't out there. I just think they don't know. I mean, I just came back from Tennessee, and it's a red state, and you feel it. I mean, these wonderful people who I was enjoying dinner with and conversation with and music with and everything. You start talking politics with them, they have a different view of what's happening, and a lot of it is dependent on the information that they are drawing on, because they are just not tied into a lot of the information sources that we are. And they would say, well, that's because we are, looking at the mainstream media, which won't tell you this and won't tell you that. There is a kind of fealty to a vision of America, whether it's Trump or someone else, that these people have. So it was a remarkable thing to, because everybody in the room seems to share sort of the same values. And yet the fact that they could, again, see this guy as anything but a train wreck was astounding to me. And one of them said, it was typical mainstream media that they didn't post a thank you to Trump and Musk for rescuing those astronauts that were stranded in space. That was one of the people who I was speaking with. This is a smart guy. And I'm thinking, well, they weren't stranded in space. It was part of the thing. And it's not, you wanted the mainstream media to run a crawl, thank you, Elon Musk and Donald Trump for bringing them home. That's really what he said he wanted. So it's quite an extreme view of things.
Back in 1819, I was on Laura Ingram's show 4 times. And, she sort of liked having a fairly liberal guest or hearing the other side of the story. It was during the Kavanaugh hearings. And I think that she was really worried if the Republicans were doing the right thing, if they should stick with Kavanaugh or pull him back while they still had the majority in the Senate and get somebody else through before maybe they lost the Senate, which eventually they would lose. So I think she really wanted another opinion. She wanted, and so we were on the show 4 times during the Kavanaugh thing. And then after that was over, I guess she and her producer just really weren't interested, and the show became like 100% Trumpy. And that's the problem. People are watching that, and it's not just Fox anymore. It's all the podcasts. It's this enormous echo chamber that just relentlessly pushes out this story. I mean, much more than they think the big media, or what do they call it, the mainstream media does, which covers things much more fairly than that whole right-wing echo chamber, which is incessant.
Yeah, indeed. I want to turn to a couple of legal things that are happening. These are really big things. We just kind of gotten off on Ukraine, but these are huge. The FBI, David Katz, former federal prosecutor, now defense attorney, the FBI reassigning agents who knelt during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. Conservatives have pointed in large measure to a photo taken during President Trump's first term in the White House as proof that the FBI harbors a liberal agenda, and they want those agents who knelt during those Black Lives Matter protests, they want them out of the agency.
Well, I mean, I think it's really outrageous, and there are civil service protections. But I think that what Trump wants to do is sort of turn negative focus on them to make their lives miserable. A lot of what he does, depending what the law ultimately does, depending whether if these people get good lawyers, hang in there, whether the Civil Service Commission will give them back pay and allow, a rescission of whatever penalties they've suffered. That's not what Trump's thinking about. Trump's thinking right now, he likes that image of intimidating them, pushing them around. They're the FBI. And it's really terrible. I'm still a working lawyer. I defend federal criminal cases. I work with the FBI. And this, whatever he's talking about, it's totally non-existent with the FBI and with the assistant U.S. attorneys. They come to work. They want to do their job. They want to do justice. That doesn't mean that I don't disagree with them on cases or on some of their decisions. But this whole image that he's painted of them, Mark, is so far out. And if everybody is, let's say it's Martin Luther King's birthday or something at an FBI office, and it's being celebrated by the office, what are they supposed to do? I mean, part of it is just what would you have done if you worked there and it was being celebrated? What would you have protested the other way? I mean, come on, it's not a big deal. It's like St. Patrick's Day. Everybody wears green. What does that mean? They have a political position about Ireland?
Thank you. Albert, I just sent you the picture that you can post. This is the picture from which Republicans said the FBI is compromised, and those people in this picture that Albert's going to show you in a moment, they were reassigned, and they're looking. There they are. They were kneeling during the Black Lives Matter protest. It was based on that picture that the new administration hunted them down and said, no, these agents who knelt during this 2020 BLM protest should be purged because the FBI harbors a liberal agenda, which is astounding to me since their FBI, I don't think, has ever harbored a liberal agenda based on everything I've read. I mean, from J. Edgar Hoover on.
First of all, the special agents at the FBI are not snowflakes. So if they're going to all land on their feet, they're going to all do great. If they get reassigned, they're going to go to other places. It's going to all be fine. There's actually a case in the courts right now, Mark, where the Department of Justice is trying to put together a list of like the 5,000 FBI agents and assistant U.S. attorneys who worked on the January 6th prosecutions. And you might say, well, what's the big deal about that list all being put in one place? It would be like Senator Joe McCarthy during the Red Scare. I have here in my hand a list of the 5,000 agents. But having it all on one list, and then there's the same idea of a purge or something like that. There's also the fear of it being released, and they're getting the names and maybe the home addresses of these FBI special agents. These guys have a badge and a gun. They're in great physical shape, and even they are worried about what I think you or Bill Maher or somebody has called the brown shirts, the 1,500 Trump convicted people from the January 6th marauding of the Capitol where 5 people died. They're worried. They're worried about having their names on a list. And it looks like the federal judge in that case has said is going to issue a restraining order, which bars exactly, it compels the FBI and the DOJ management to handle that list of the FBI special agents and assistant U.S. attorneys who worked on January 6th prosecutions. And, it's so crazy. I have one of them out here in L.A. that I disagree with on everything. He's a hard charger. He's so pro-government. He's so unreasonable, in my opinion. He worked on one of these January 6 cases. He was kind of proud of it. I mean, why wouldn't you be proud of it? It was the biggest investigation in the history of the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. What, you want to be the guy left off of it? If as much as I didn't like his comportment on our case, the idea that he would be in trouble because he was one of the hundreds of U.S. attorneys who worked in that case, he had to set his clock on Washington time because everything happened Washington schedule, and he didn't want to be out of step. So I remember that dealing with him, I always had to remember, hey, this guy's on D.C. time.
Yeah,
It's so stupid, Mark. It's so phenomenally stupid and unreasonable. It's just the revenge tour. It's just a vendetta for its own sake. And I guarantee you, as stupid as some of the people around Trump are, every one of them said to him, you just can't go down this road. You look so terrible. And of course, he's frittered away.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think Pam Bondi has pursued these kinds of jihadist efforts on the part of Trump, the vengeful pursuit of people who've gone against him, those who were involved in those investigations to which you've referred. I mean, I think she's been on board. She's kind of a signatory to it all.
I don't know anything inside, Mark, but she hits me as someone with her arm twisted behind her back. I think the only true zealot. Okay. I think Kash Patel's a true zealot. But again, I'm not a mind reader, so it's just pure opinion.
Of course. But thank you. Not to interrupt, and then but just that zealotry that you're talking about. When that meets the law, it's a scary time. So you've got somebody like Patel, who's in charge of the FBI and can pursue these investigations and even arrests, and you've got Bondi, arm twisted or not, who is the highest ranking officer of justice in the land.
One of these days we can go through the whole cabinet and high officials, and I'll tell you, opportunist, zealot, true believer, ass kisser.
Okay, I love that plan. So the legal challenges for Trump, it strikes me they're numerous, and he's losing a lot of these cases. How does this all game out? Because it's now really, he's going to have to play by even the marginal rules I was mentioning in the first half hour, and you know this, that even an accelerated kind of court case that's associated with court, I wouldn't even call it a case. I mean, these the due process situations that these illegals find themselves in, they're going to move very, very quickly. I mean, this is not a long court case typically with these guys.
Well, I think that, the deportation hearings and whatnot, they'll be cranked up again. I think that he just so overstepped on this thing. And as I say, he's going down in popularity, and everything changes, when he's at like 38% on handling the economy. This guy ran on the economy. Now he's at 38% on the economy. It's all getting worse. Out here in LA, people, I have a client who's actually a customs broker. And so I've been following the port, as part of my practice. The port is a disaster out here. The shipping is down like a third into LA. The reverberations are going to be felt everywhere. All these truckers, everybody associated with having a really busy port. We're not going to have a busy port. And then in a couple of months, we're going to have the empty shelves. And all of it is going to make Trump look terrible. And on top of that, there are all these violations of the law. I know you laughed at me last time I said this, but at some point he's going to say, I don't need this. I don't need this shock and awe. Another outrage that I commented on the show, and I know, Mark, you didn't have time to play the whole thing, was this Wisconsin state judge being handcuffed. And I'm one of the people who, I'm right between the people who think it's outrageous that she ever got prosecuted, and the other side of it. I don't think it's outrageous that she's getting prosecuted, but I think it's absolutely unconscionable. Two things. Number one, that she got handcuffed and perp walked. That was obviously to intimidate other judges who have nothing to do with this. She's a state judge who supposedly was out of line in the same way a state judge was in Massachusetts during the first term. This is the exact, almost the exact replica of another case that happened with a judge in Massachusetts. So I'm not surprised that she's in trouble over this thing and suspended by the Wisconsin Supreme Court from appearing on the bench. But that she was handcuffed and perp walked is a total outrage. and the case was publicized by Kash Patel, he would have been in an Office of Professional Responsibility misconduct investigation like that if they were real inspectors general and there was a real respect for law. He has no right at all to get out there and say, here's a picture of this judge that we handcuffed. There's very strict rules on what assistant U.S. attorneys can say about cases, what the attorney general can show, and to show a picture of her being perp walked. And of course, he had her arrested for no other reason than to show her being arrested and the perp walk itself. And that was an absolute outrage by Kash Patel.
Well, and what you were started with, and then I want to move on to quickly church and state separation, and then we got to wrap up. But what you point to is, or allude to, is interesting, because you're kind of alluding to the fact that maybe what this judge did might have been falling into the category of obstruction of justice.
It might be obstruction, which she was charged with, and it might be harboring a person you know to be illegally in the United States, which is the second charge.
Right.
And if I understand the facts, and of course, everyone's presumed innocent. A judge, somebody illegally in the United States, everybody's presumed innocent. But at least according to their affidavit, sworn under penalty of perjury, there's 2 ICE agents in the courthouse. It's not against the law to be in a courthouse. She is apparently, at least according to them, very angry and almost sort of personally offended that they would be in her courthouse, near her courtroom, to execute this arrest. So she tells them, she apparently comes out off the bench. She goes out in the hallway where they're waiting. There's one door to come out of the courtroom. And as soon as this guy comes out of the courtroom, he's going to be arrested. And that's what ICE is there for. And she supposedly knows that. And she goes out in the hallway and she starts berating them and says, you guys have to go speak to the chief judge. If you're doing something like this, you have to go down the hall and speak to the chief judge. And no sooner do they go down the hall to speak with the chief judge, she goes back into her courtroom. She takes this person who, from what they're saying, is illegally in the United States and is about to be arrested by ICE, out the back door. There's a back door in a lot of these courtrooms that jurors go out and people in custody are taken out. And she lets them out through the back door. So she's harboring him for the period of time that she has control of him and is taking him out the back door. Sure. And then the whole thing is, of course, completely flubbed. And so the ICE agents manage to see this guy out on the street and they have a foot chase and they get him. I mean, and like I said, there was a case like that during the first Trump term. So you can certainly see why she's in trouble. One of the top lawyers in America, some guy who argues in the Supreme Court all the time, has come to her defense. She's rallying a defense. I get it. I get why they're demonstrating outside the Milwaukee courthouse. And I understand why people are outraged over this. But at the same time, you know, here's what Trump thinks. As it's all visual. It's all like a TV show. Trump says to himself, do I mind being up? It's not the principle for him. Do I mind being up against this person? Do I mind being up against that narrative that I just told you? And then a lot of defenders of her say, my God, we want to have people feel free to come to the courthouse, even if they're illegally in the United States. But guess what? This wasn't a juror. This certainly wasn't a witness. This was the perpetrator of domestic violence who they were arresting at the courthouse. So Trump says to himself, again, I got a domestic violence guy. I got this lady with her deportment toward these ICE agents. I got 2 of them who are willing to swear under oath that this is how the whole thing went down. We apprehended the guy running out of the back courthouse door. Trump says to himself, you know what? Game on.
Right, right. And so that's why in so many of these cases, the water can be muddied by the actual person and their history and their status. And so you get into that. But as you say, the treatment of the judge seems open and shut. And it really was beyond the pale.
Outrageous, awful. I hope
and as you also say, it's designed to send a message. I mean, that's the reason for all this.
If there's anybody who's not a flight risk, but you know, this is one of the things, there's so much. I've stood there with people who were as little a flight risk as her and seen them get detained by federal judges. So, you know, it's just, what can I say, Mark? I do the best I can to, and I would represent her in a minute.
Well, but the idea here is it's being played out across the board. It's the suing of CBS and ABC. It's the going after the universities. It's going after the law firms and shaking them down for money. This is all part of a kind. And the arrest, a high-profile arrest, is the theater of getting you to obey. And that's all in service of this. The universities, the media, the judicial system, it is all part of a type. And it's a unified strategy that, while maybe seeming sloppy, is very high profile, very aggressive, and very convincing. I mean, they've cowed an entire party. The GOP, we just had a guy on, he's kind of like classic GOP from Bush administration. He can't even recognize the place. Like, he's praying for the good old days when they were just, it was a different kind of fascism, economic fascism. All right.
Well, these folks have to vote for the Democrats. And if someone comes along like Clinton, they have to say to themselves, because the Republicans will vote for such a person. I just saw Governor Gretchen Whitmer speak at USC at the book fair the other day. I think she'd be a wonderful candidate. I see Shapiro. I think that he'd be a wonderful candidate. I'm always pushing without any encouragement. I'm going to get a phone call that says to me, stop. I'm always saying my old friend Adam Schiff would be a great candidate. And then the left has to recognize that I'm going to be controversial right now. Okay. AOC is not going to beat JD Vance. It's just, you got to make your peace with that. There's a lot of things that you may agree with her on. There's a lot of things that you can get in the agenda. Win first. But she's not the person to hand you back the White House.
Yeah, Cici says Orban's takeover of Hungary, 3 key steps that MAGA is following. Take over the courts, take over the media, overhaul electoral laws. Exactly. I see it as a really...
Can I address her first point? Yeah. Trump has not taken over the courts. The courts have stood up to him. He's lost 95% of his time, of the time. Almost everything that he's done that's been impetuous, okay, and not thought through, the judges have stopped. Musk got away, I think, with copying a lot of those records, and I think the judges were not fast enough to see what he was doing. I think every judge should have issued a temporary restraining order the day a Musk case came before that judge. I think we're going to see the repercussions of how he's tapped into and copied those records, and you're never going to get that genie back in the bottle. But when you look at what Trump has done, Trump has been reversed by the courts over and over again. He hasn't taken over the courts. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that he has to facilitate the return of this Abrego Garcia. The courts are going to hold up on the birthright citizenship. They're going to say that's no good. Over and over again, the courts have stood up to him. So he has not taken over the courts.
Okay, well, let me push back on that a little bit, even though you know this stuff and I don't. I would say the birthright citizenship stuff doesn't speak to his power. He can. It's a give me. It's really more for his base. You even, I think, maybe noted it as such in one of our conversations. It's like, hey, I tried with the birthright citizenship, but they knocked it down. He is seeing from that Supreme Court something that you didn't predict, and no one did. Everybody kind of was on the side of, well, they're not going to go for presidential immunity, but they actually
did. No, Mark, I predicted that one. I said there was a case called Fitzgerald.
Oh, that's right, the Nixon thing. I'm so sorry. Yeah, you did. You did. I apologize.
Which gave a president civil immunity. I said, watch out. They may extend that to criminal immunity. And
that's what they did.
MSNBC never reported that. They reported this like this was like something so far out of left field, blah, blah, blah. I did predict this.
I'm so sorry, David. I apologize. That is apologize.
I didn't agree with Fitzgerald, and I didn't agree with this happening. And I think they went way too far. This, Roberts did not get that case. So I think he's gotten it now that he's seen Trump. He's not. He's going to have to find God, but it'll be a little late. But you're right. I misspoke.
I misspoke.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'm proud of my Katz.
You're absolutely.
Nobody's giving me crap about my
Katz's
record on the Mark Thompson. You guys get the benefit of it.
Would you like to apologize for what you've done?
I would like to apologize.
I'm not like the CNBC guys.
All right. So
here is Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.